Good afternoon. My name is Philip Lovejoy, and I'm the Executive Director of the Harvard Alumni Association. Thank you so much for joining us at this program today. I have a few housekeeping notes before we begin. First, today's program is an off-the-record opportunity solely for our Harvard alumni. Please note that we are using Zoom webinar, so your camera and audio will remain muted. If you have a question for Dean Gay, please enter it into the Q&A box below, and we'll provide it to our moderator. Please also include your class year in that question. If you're having difficulties in Zoom, this program is also being live streamed via YouTube, and you'll find the link for that in the confirmation email that we sent to you. Today, I'm happy to say we have hundreds of college alumni with us, as well as members of the Crimson Society, those who have already celebrated their 50th reunion, and those in their 5th to 75th reunions. Thank you so much for being with us here today. I'm delighted to welcome you to introduce today's speakers. First, Claudine Gay, the Edugyan Family Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Claudine Gay leads Harvard's Faculty of Arts and Sciences with a long-standing dedication to academic service, to the value of scholarship, and a deep devotion to mentorship for both students and faculty. She assumed the role of Edugyan Family Dean of the FAS in August of 2018, having served previously as Dean of Social Science from 2015 to 2018. She's also founding chair of the Inequality in America initiative, a multidisciplinary effort launched in 2017, and has served as a professor of government and African American studies since 2006. Our moderator today is my boss, Brian Lee, Harvard University's Vice President for Alumni Affairs and Development. Even though he has that term development in his title, he's deeply committed to our work in the Alumni Association, for which I'm very grateful. Before coming to Harvard, Brian worked at Caltech as the Vice President for Development and Institute Relations. Prior to his role at Caltech, he spent 26 years at Tufts, including many years working with then Tufts President, Larry Bacow. I'm thankful to you both, Brian and Claudine, for your deep commitment to the alumni community. Without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Claudine and Brian to the virtual stage. Brian, take it away.
Thank you very much, Philip. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. And first, I want to offer my congratulations to all of those who are celebrating their reunions. It's regrettable that you couldn't be with us here physically. We look forward to a future opportunity when you will be with us. But I hope you've enjoyed the programming that the HAA staff has worked hard to provide for you. And today, I'm delighted and we feel honored to have with us Dean Claudine Gay for a conversation. So first, Claudine, these have been exceptionally challenging and uncertain times, and it's good to see you here with us, seemingly weathering the storm with aplomb. So I just want to ask you, how are you faring personally? These are stressful times for leaders. Your job is a big one. You have enormous responsibility for steering the FAS through these shoals. How are you doing and how are you faring?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to join you all this afternoon. It's a real honor to be here. And like Brian, I wish we could actually all be together in person. How am I doing? So I feel very fortunate. I think, I'm as stir crazy as the rest of the world from too many weeks at home. The weekend has become an abstract concept because all boundaries between work and leisure have just utterly disappeared. And of course, I'm sad for my 13-year-old son who just desperately misses his friends and his teachers and his independence. But physically, I'm healthy and my family's been healthy. So for that, I'm just enormously grateful. And as I watched commencement yesterday, I have to admit, I felt myself exhale for the first time in about 11 weeks. So that felt really good.
That's terrific. I just want to note that it's a special pleasure. You and I have the privilege of working together closely when we're on campus. I see you in Zoom meetings, but you and I haven't actually had a chance to interact much in recent weeks. So this is a special pleasure for me. The spring semester, as we all know, was anomalous on many fronts, to say the least.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could share with our alums the experience. What was the experience like for you as you planned for almost the unimaginable, which was to remove our students from campus? What was the hardest part, and did you experience unexpected or inspiring moments in the midst of all of that challenge?
So it was a whirlwind week in March. In the space of 5 days, 90% of our undergraduates managed to pack up and move out with no notice, obviously. And how were they able to do that? Obviously in part through their own hard work, but also we mobilized, frankly, all of Harvard to get it done. So one of the things that we did on the very first day, right after we announced that we were going to move to de-densify the campus, is that we put up an online sign-up sheet for anyone who wanted to volunteer time to help the students get themselves packed and moved out. And over 200 faculty and staff signed up for shifts, including deans, to volunteer their time and their labor to help students move out. In addition to the 67,000 boxes that we provided, students also received underwriting for shipping and storage and airplane tickets and any other immediate needs that would help them. Many of our international students confronted some really unique challenges and a very difficult decision, in some cases complicated by visa issues, about whether to return home or to remain in the US. And the Harvard International Office, together with the Office for the Vice Provost for International Affairs and various partners around across Harvard schools, really worked around the clock from that Tuesday through that Sunday to find solutions for each and every student who came to us with concerns, especially around international travel issues. And then, once the move out was complete on, Sunday, I think Sunday, March 15th by 5 p.m., the approximately 350 undergrads who were granted permission to remain on campus moved into the river houses, where they each had individual bedrooms and bathrooms. Each room was equipped with a micro fridge to store prepackaged meals. Our graduate students, some of whom live on campus, they were also making the transition to de-densified dorms, and approximately 200 of our graduate students, we moved them into similar accommodations in the quad. So again, single rooms with single bathrooms and micro fridges. So it was just days of feverish, nearly around the clock activity in that week in March. And then it was promptly followed by equally intense work to ramp down our on-campus research activities and prepare for remote teaching. And, in terms of what I saw as I worked with and also just observed my colleagues is, through it all, I was just amazed and inspired by the resolve, the urgency, the generosity of the whole community. I mean, people took on additional assignments. They pitched in wherever they could help. They learned to work in new ways, and their commitment to our mission of excellence in teaching and research remained unshakable. Their commitment to our students, unshakable. And those at the end of the day are the attributes that are kind of our most powerful tools, both as individuals and as an institution as we navigate through this crisis, which, as you know, may have begun for us in March, but is far, far, far from over.
I was incredibly impressed. I actually thought it was awe-inspiring to see your team in action. The dedication, the resilience, the compassion, the commitment that was evidenced by all members of the FAS community and across campus to come together and do what might have been unimaginable. Had someone told us 2 weeks earlier we would be asked to undertake this, it was beyond imagination. And yet the way it was executed was really, I think, a credit.
And even honestly, and even at the moment where we made the decision, we were kind of alone out there with many, many people feeling that we had overreacted and that we were taking steps that were draconian. And obviously within a matter of days, things that seemed draconian in retrospect, probably were woefully inadequate. So yeah.
Well, one of the memorable moments for me, Claudine, was the op-ed piece written in the Crimson by a student, a college student, who applauded the administration for decisions after he and others had decided to take the administration to task. There was a realization that this action actually saved lives. And
Yeah.
so at the end of
Yeah.
the day, I think Harvard should be proud that it led at a very challenging time when the pathway forward was not at all obvious.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Claudine, taking just a step back, many of our alumni in the audience today haven't been back to campus for 5 or more years and might not have had the privilege of getting to know you, especially in your role as the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Maybe you could share a bit about your experience here at Harvard. You're no newcomer to Harvard.
Yeah.
And maybe you could reflect on the first 2 years serving as Dean.
Yeah. So you're right. I'm not a newcomer to Harvard. I've actually been a member of the Harvard community now for more than half my life. And I first arrived as a graduate student in the government department in 1992. And honestly, I just instantly fell in love with the place. The intellectual vitality, just the richness of the university, the scale of the place, the passion for learning, the commitment to excellence and leadership, all of which were immediately apparent even to a brand new graduate student. And those are the things that really sustained me as a graduate student. There were also the things that lured me back to Harvard as a faculty member when I came back in 2006 after beginning my career at Stanford. And it's why I felt so humbled first when Mike Smith invited me to be Dean of Social Science, and then in 2018 when President Bacow invited me to lead the FAS. In these first couple of years have been interesting. Some moments more eventful than others. And despite the fact that, again, I'm not a newcomer and I've been part of the Harvard community for a long time, I pretty much knew from the moment that I stepped into the role that I had a lot to learn about the FAS. And so I spent really the better part of my first year on something of a walkabout, just actively seeking out opportunities to be surprised and enlightened by my colleagues. So talking with faculty, students, librarians, and coaches, sitting with them in their spaces and just hearing from them what inspires their work, how they live their mission and our mission, and what they see as some of the opportunities for Harvard to lead. And I knew that if I listened closely, that my priorities for the FAS would emerge almost organically through those conversations. And the other thing that was achieved through spending that first year that way is that those conversations really deepened my appreciation for just how extraordinary and unique our community is. And honestly, the events of the last few weeks, yes, they've been very challenging, but frankly, they've also just reinforced for me just how incredibly strong and powerful a community we are.
Thank you. I found yesterday's ceremony to be incredibly moving, and I think, we all felt pangs of yearning that we would have preferred to be in the yard. As a relative newcomer, I've been in higher education for 34 years. I've seen many commencements. I have to say, last year, having only been here for 18 months, was my first Harvard commencement, and I experienced probably the most profound experience of a commencement. The tradition of walking through the yard as part of the procession and looking in the faces of these young people was so deeply moving and was so impactful for me. To not be able to experience that again, I feel a sense of loss.
Get that back? Yes.
But I feel even more loss for our terrific members of the class of 2020 who have really will continue to persevere. I've really watched the resilience of the faculty, the staff, and the students. As I said, the faculty's pivot and the students' pivot to an entirely different mode of learning was amazing for me. That we could have accomplished that in such a short period of time still seems almost unbelievable. I wonder if you could share your perspective on that pivot and maybe enlighten us with some examples of faculty or students you saw in action that inspired you or impressed you.
Oh yeah, so many. Honestly, there have just been, over the last 11 weeks, there have been so many acts of just everyday heroism that have just been a constant source of inspiration and pride. I'll begin with the college staff who in that 5-day period all fanned out and sat in the dining halls with a credit card, just paying and buying plane tickets for students to help them get home. That was incredible. You just setting up in Annenberg, setting up in all the houses. But that kind of dedication has persisted for these last weeks. We have faculty from the sciences and Cs. They immediately mobilized to harvest PPE from their labs in order to donate them to frontline health workers. So they collected multiple rounds of masks and gloves and face shields and disposable lab coats and coveralls. And then the building staff and the custodians and the guys in shipping and receiving, they all played a really essential role in collecting these and getting them delivered. It was just this incredible team effort across the FAS. Researchers like Pardis Sabeti, who's an infectious disease specialist, who's probably best known for her work sequencing the Ebola virus in 2014. She's been at the front lines of the effort to set up and scale COVID-19 testing in the Boston area. Jennifer Lewis, who's a leading bioengineer at SEAS, whose specialty is 3D printing. She and her team have shifted all their work to working with healthcare professionals to design, prototype, and fabricate low-cost plastic and foam-based face shields that could be quickly mass-produced. And to date, they've delivered almost 1,000 of these face shields to some of our local area hospitals to address, again, the shortage of personal protective equipment for some of our healthcare workers. The students also have been amazing, not only in affecting the pivot, but also continuing to find ways to give back at a time of extraordinary challenge for many of them and for their families. So there's this great college program called Minuet. It stands for Music in Hospitals and Nursing Homes Using Entertainment as Therapy. And the idea is that it brings live music into some of the area hospitals and nursing homes around Cambridge and Boston. And the group typically holds 4 in-person live performances in Cambridge and Boston each month. But obviously, given the current circumstances, the Minuet members have taken to producing virtual performances that have been broadcast in the nursing homes in order to continue sharing their music and just spreading joy among the residents. Our faculty deans in the houses have been finding all sorts of ways to keep some of the most beloved house traditions alive, as well as innovate around them, given our new circumstances. So I know that many of the houses, for example, continue to host some variation on their senior dinners. And Dunster hosted its Red Tie dinner over Zoom, and Quincy held their annual karaoke show virtually. So again, just trying to keep some of these traditions and sense of community alive. And then of course, there was the pivot to remote teaching and learning, for which there was no precedent. And there, faculty and teaching fellows in the space of a week had to completely reimagine their courses, master new technology, and deliver on the educational mission. And all while, homeschooling their own kids and caring for loved ones impacted by the virus. And, the speed and success with which they all embrace the transition, again, speaks to the strength of our community. Really, it's just been incredibly moving. And, the thing that, has been demonstrated time and again is not just that we're resilient, but that we're generous and creative as well. And that is also important.
Thank you. Shifting gears a little bit and looking at things more broadly, the pandemic has revealed much about social and economic inequality.
Mm-hmm.
One of the many sets of experiences that you bring to the job as Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences is your own scholarship and work in inequality and your role as the founder of the Inequality in America initiative at Harvard. How has the pandemic changed the way you think about inequality and Harvard's role in addressing these issues?
Yeah.
And also, to what degree does your experience studying inequality inform your thinking and result in decisions that can narrow the disparity?
Yeah. Such a great question. One of the painful ironies of this pandemic is that it touches everyone by definition, and yet it's not the great equalizer. Instead, COVID-19 has been, refracted through our structural inequality and has kind of exposed every type and gradation of difference as a consequence. So who's infected and who dies, who had early access to testing and who didn't, who can work from home and who can't. And now, it's interesting, as the economy reopens, who must decide between risking their health by returning to their workplace versus risking their economic well-being by continuing to stay at home, and who's kind of spared that choice. I think some of the most striking human outcomes associated with the pandemic are all related to these long-standing inequalities. There is I think a growing recognition of that fact. The observations that I've just listed are ones that I think even sort of a casual consumer of the newspaper would have been is clearly able to see. And I'm hoping that in this moment of heightened awareness and sensitivity to these issues, and a really concrete sense for how inequality manifests and impacts individual lives, that in that there's hope and promise of greater resolve, honestly, for taking on these challenges and rebuilding in a different way. And all of that, I think this means that the work that we do here to understand the sources and mechanisms of inequality, to identify solutions, to connect our research with practice, all of that is now even more important in ways that I think, again, are broadly recognized and transparent to people. The pandemic and the shift to remote teaching and learning has also, just kind of thinking about our own community, it's also really brought into sharp relief the inequalities within our own Harvard community, in particular among our student population. So, all students have experienced disruption, but some confronted much more severe issues, including, home environments that made remote learning just really, really difficult. So cramped and noisy spaces, limited or spotty internet access, stressed home finances because of layoffs, childcare or elder care responsibilities. And that experience, again, has reminded us of the importance of the work we do on campus to equalize the learning environment and the learning opportunities so that every student has full access to the Harvard experience and can make authentic choices about their education and really achieve their full potential. So one of the consequences of the last 10 weeks has been to really deepen my commitment to that work, to financial aid, to academic inclusion. And as we kind of reconcile ourselves to a new normal that may include waves of viral outbreaks, I think we need to make sure that our students' academic trajectories are resilient to these potential future disruptions. I apologize for the landscaping crew. Hopefully it's not.
These are the challenges we face.
One of the immediate things that we did was eliminate all non-essential spending, but apparently that does not apply to landscaping at the FAS Dean's house. So a little bit embarrassing, but we'll get on that one next.
Claudine, do you want to say just a couple of words about the Inequality in America initiative? It's obviously related to much of what you just described, but the initiative was of your own creation with your faculty colleagues. Maybe just a couple of words about that might be of interest to our alumni.
Yeah, so this is an initiative that was launched a couple of years ago, and really the spirit of it is to find new ways to elevate and energize the research, the teaching, and the practitioner collaborations around inequality. So we support faculty who are launching new research on inequality, particularly collaborative research that's multidisciplinary. We recruit postdoctoral fellows who are doing cutting edge work, that especially cutting edge work that has clear applications to solutions around inequality. We're building a curriculum that makes it easier for students, particularly for undergrads with interest in inequality, to build a course of study on this topic. And we're trying to find new ways of connecting our research and practice and our teaching and practice, in part through collaborations with nonprofits and sort of field-based work launched from the college. So it's a kind of a multi-pronged approach, but again, all trained around this core issue and challenge of social and economic inequality.
Thank you, Claudine. That's obviously very promising work. I want to think back to an interview I saw soon after your appointment. There was a quote. You mentioned that you were wholly focused on the future of Harvard's largest faculty. I've been incredibly impressed since I've arrived at Harvard to become acquainted with the work, the scope, the breadth of the excellence of the FAS faculty. What do you see as the future, and what do you hope to accomplish on that front?
Great question. So if I were to reduce it, I'd say I have kind of three overarching ambitions for the FAS. And honestly, the unprecedented challenges that we're facing now have only added new urgency to them for me. The first is build an academic community of unparalleled strength and then activate its full potential. And one of the ways that we do that is through investing in academic inclusion. So in the context of our current challenge, whether in person or remote, we want to make sure that every student has what he or she needs to succeed academically at Harvard. We also do it through investments in research so that we not only recruit the world's best faculty, but we actually put resources behind their best ideas. Again, especially in a moment like the one we're facing, where we're already starting to see some recession-related disruptions in the external funding environment. One of my other ambitions is finding new ways to connect Harvard to the world, and doing that by committing ourselves to addressing problems of public importance. I think among the most vital things that a leading university can do is match our best brain power to the biggest challenges facing humanity. And so, the researchers that we have who are contributing to the global fight against the pandemic is absolutely in line with a core ambition of mine. The work that we're doing on inequality, again, also very much in line and motivated by that ambition. And then the third is to catalyze innovation, because organizations that have a lasting impact in the world are those that continually renew themselves, that seize opportunities where innovation and leadership are needed, respond to new demands and challenges, and try new things. So, if we're going to emerge from this crisis as a leader among our peers, and that really should be our ambition, we have to transform how we pursue our mission and become, really for the long term, a remote-ready institution that's always able to pivot when a pivot is necessary without compromising our standards of excellence. So to my mind, the future of the FAS still depends on our progress against these, three big goals. And so these are the ambitions that really fuel my deanship. And I remain committed really to advancing them over the course of my time in this role.
Thank you very much, Dean Gay. I'm going to now turn to alumni questions. Our alumni have submitted in advance a number of very interesting questions. And although we won't be able to get to all of them, I do think there's some here that are worth your attention. So let me ask here from one of our alums. Understanding that all of higher education is working to determine the best approach to the fall semester, can you share more about the FAS planning process now underway?
Yeah.
And how that is informing your thinking about plans beyond the fall?
Yeah. Absolutely a question I would expect, because that is the question on everyone's mind. So let me start with just, with two observations. And I always like to start here because they often get lost once you get down into the messy details of planning, but they're very important to keep in view. The first is that we want our students back. desperately. And I felt that even more acutely yesterday watching commencement. The residential experience is core to the Harvard College identity. And frankly, even much of our research depends on physical proximity. So the question is, what is the path to bringing our students back? And then how do we maintain their academic progress in the meantime? So that's the first thing I just wanted to be really clear about. The second is that I think the world is focused on fall 2020, but the truth is that whatever we do in the fall must be part of a comprehensive plan for all of next academic year. And so as we think about our planning and for the upcoming semester, we're thinking about it in that broader context. So in terms of how we're approaching it, I asked the Dean of Science for FAS, who's Chris Stubbs, and the FAS Registrar, Mike Burke, to co-lead our planning process. And the work that they're leading is undertaken through 11 different working groups. Each one of them is led by a chair or co-chair that draws from the diverse expertise and perspectives of our faculty and staff. And honestly, just the number of working groups and the range of issues that they're covering, those alone are prima facie evidence of just the complexity of the challenge that we face. And I invite any of you and all of you to actually just visit the FAS website. There's a public website where we list our entire fall planning process, including the working groups and the various issues that they're working through. So what I'll say is that the work is being undertaken with extreme thoughtfulness and deep care for our students and for the experience that we're trying to create for them. But the problem that we're trying to solve is a really tough one. So how do we teach and house during a public health crisis on an open campus in a densely packed urban area when strict compliance with safety protocols is not assured, and where the institution has a duty of care that extends to a diverse and multi-generational community of faculty, students, and staff? So it presents so many issues once you understand the problem that it is that we're trying to solve. And those issues include, the tension between personal privacy and community safety when it comes to things like testing and tracing, the different needs of a low-risk group of young people and a high-risk group of faculty who teach them and staff who support them, the challenges of compliance among young people who just want to be together, and then just the kind of the Rubik's Cube of calendars and schedules that we would need to fit together to create what's necessary in a pre-vaccine, pre-therapeutics environment, which is low density, but still a high quality experience. So nothing about this task is easy. We do know more now than we did 10 weeks ago, but there's still much that we don't know about some important aspects of our situation, like what the course of the disease will be, how testing and treatment will evolve over the next 6 to 12 to 18 months, what our state will require and when, and fundamentally, how our students will respond. So it's a very noisy context for undertaking work that's this complex and consequential, which again is why the work is organized through all these separate working groups. So one thing that is clear that I feel like I can say without making news and not surprising anyone is that until a vaccine is widely available, any options for the upcoming academic year will look different than the Harvard we left behind on March 10th, with new community-wide protocols and practices that will be necessary to ensure the health and safety of not only our community, but also the society at large. Because obviously we can't act in ways or at a pace that deepens the public health crisis in our region. So our intention is to reach and announce a decision about next academic year by the beginning of July. And we're, I think, on track to be able to meet that self-imposed deadline.
Thank you very much. I think about my own personal experience, and I think prior to working remotely, I had done exactly 2 Zoom calls ever, which is amazing because I do 2 per hour for the last 10 weeks. And I'm just curious, what have we learned about best practices in online teaching and learning, and what will Harvard do next year to improve the online learning experience for the students?
Yeah. So I want to approach this question with some humility, acknowledging that we're still learning, honestly. And we will continually iterate and hopefully iterate towards greater and greater success. So really throughout this process, we've been collecting data on a pretty steady basis. So surveying the FAS faculty about the challenges and successes in their sort of online teaching experience, and when possible, trying to introduce some mid-course corrections and support to address some immediate challenges they were facing. The college has been canvassing all students about what worked and didn't work over the course of the spring, and has also been running focus groups with representative samplings of students about some of the various scenarios for the fall. And then in addition, next week, Dean Claudine is going to be hosting a college-wide town hall for all students. So what we've learned by listening to our community and sort of asking these quite pointed questions is that successful online teaching actually doesn't depend on high production videos or on other technological bells and whistles. It depends honestly on enabling meaningful interactions among students and between students and faculty. And conveniently, this has always been the hallmark of a Harvard College education. And so investments here are things that will outlast the current crisis. So as we are preparing for next year, the training that we're offering, that we will be offering faculty, as well as the graduate teaching fellows who, support a lot of our instruction, is going to be focusing on things like, how do you create a sense of community within courses and within concentrations when you're trying to do it remotely? How do you increase interactivity both among students and between students and faculty? And what are some of, not just the challenges, but also the opportunities that are presented by learning in place, by actually having your students dispersed around the world? And are there ways to bring that new context into the course? So faculty are going to be going through training over the course of the summer, addressing some of these topics in a whole variety of workshops. The other thing I would say is that, so we've learned a lot about remote teaching, and we're using that to continue to improve our efforts on that front. We've also, coming back to my earlier comments about inequality, we've also learned a lot about remote learning and the kinds of supports that really need to be in place so that every one of our students can do that effectively. And so we're going to be developing a process, for example, to proactively identify student needs so that, again, we can ensure that all students are able to do their best work, whether that is happening on campus or is happening remotely.
Thank you very much. A member of the audience asks this question: do you envision that the pandemic will inspire new courses?
Yeah. And so first of all, there's just kind of an open call out to the faculty for, pandemic related courses. And there are already 2 that we know for sure. So Michael Sandel is going to be reimagining his quite famous justice course as a pandemic ethics class. And Peter Gallison, who's a physicist and historian of science, he's leading a group of university professors in creating a course on COVID, sort of COVID examined from every possible dimension. And both of these will be Harvard-wide courses that are open to students from every Harvard school, so both undergraduates as well as students in the professional schools. And it's also going to be, they're both going to be a part of Gen Ed. And so it's an enthusiastic yes. It's one of the things that we're all super excited for because faculty are really leading into this. And we already know of at least 2 courses that will be designed with the pandemic in mind.
Terrific. Here's a question that resonates with me as a former high school English teacher. I like this one. What role should the humanities play in an increasingly technologically oriented academy and world? And maybe you could say a word about embedded ethics, which has impressed me so much. The more I've learned about that particular course, but I don't want to constrain your answer.
No. That's a great question. And I mean, like I have a kind of a very simple response to that, which is I think it's the humanities and humanistic inquiry that gives us the space and the tools to really reflect on what it means to be human. And that's a question that is relevant across time and context. So even as we race ahead technologically, I think there's always going to be a need for deep thinking in the humanistic space. That said, we're not leaving this to chance. We're also trying to be quite intentional about applying humanistic insight to some of the issues that emerge as a byproduct of technological advances. And a prime example is the one, Brian, you just mentioned, which is the Embedded Ethics Program. So this is a program that started about 2.5 years ago. And it is a collaboration between our philosophy and computer science departments. And the idea here is to, as the name implies, embed philosophers and philosophy into CS courses. So not only embed them in terms of draw on philosophical readings and add them to a CS course, but literally philosophy graduate students, philosophy postdocs, and philosophy faculty who are co-teaching alongside computer scientists, developing course assignments for courses in computer science. And the idea here is enabling students to wrestle with the ethical and social issues presented by technology and come to view them not as problems for others to solve, for the ethicists to solve, or the social scientists to solve after the fact, but to view them as part of the design challenge for any engineer. And so this is an effort that began from the bottom up. It started as an effort to embed philosophy in just a couple of CS courses. And in the space, again, of 6 or 7 semesters, it now has spread to virtually every course in the undergraduate curriculum in CS. I think it's over 20 courses at this point have serious engagement with philosophy and ethical questions. And now our faculty in the life sciences are eager to adopt a similar approach. So we're hoping to be able to scale this up. And it really is one of a kind in the country and has already become a model for other institutions. And not only other universities, but also in K through 12 and high schools have also been trying to adopt some elements of the curriculum that's been developed as part of embedded ethics. So, I mean, again, that's one example of how, the humanities once again demonstrate their, critical relevance to, frankly, every challenge that is presented by being human.
Thank you very much. An additional question from Alum says, this is a transformative time for all students in the university as a whole. How are we doing? And how are the students transforming?
Yeah, I think we're doing well, in some ways surprisingly well. Again, I've talked about some of the ways that we've had to turn on a dime, and not just once, not just twice, but over and over again over the last 10 weeks, getting students off campus, getting students who remained on campus in a place where they're safe, ramping down our research so that trying to remain research active in a context where we're working remotely, and so on and so on. So I think we've demonstrated that we can be nimble, and it's something that I think many of us hoped was the case, and some of us actually believed, at least in an abstract way, it was the case. But now I think over the last 10 weeks, we've demonstrated a capacity to be nimble. I think the other thing that has been really powerful is, and Brian, you alluded to this in in the Crimson piece, is that, the number of students who have just kind of spontaneously sent just the kindest emails, whether it's to me or to Rakesh, reflecting on their gratitude for the step we took to keep them safe and their commitment to not only protecting their own individual health, but protecting the health of the faculty, the staff who've remained on campus. So the number of emails that have talked about wanting to make sure that they didn't put the dining hall workers in harm's way by continuing to be crowded into the dorms and houses. So so that kind of again, generosity and selflessness, which I've always believed was always there, but actually being able to see the concrete manifestations of it has been pretty great. And then the last thing I would say is that our students have been struggling with a lot over the last 10 weeks, including just the stages of grief about a college experience cut short and missing their friends, and yet they're still finding ways to serve others. And so there's a student that I know of who is she lives in LA, but in the last 10 weeks she has created this online mentoring platform that connects K through 12 kids who frankly are not able to maintain their learning, connecting them with mentors literally around the world who are providing them support and academic enrichment. And this is an idea that that came to her as she was flying home from Boston to LA, and within a week or so of being home had created this program called Coeducation. So again, our students reminding us that they take seriously our mission to develop citizen leaders.
There's a question that's just come in that has been submitted, which says, can you talk a little bit about your role as a freshman advisor?
Wow.
And do you feel you learn from your students?
Oh my gosh, yes. So I love being a freshman advisor. I just, and I'm the kind of advisor where, they start off with me in their first year, but then I just continue to stay in their lives, whether they like it or not, for their entire journey, which is so rewarding because you can just see the arc of their development, meeting them first in August before they've begun and they're nervous and excited and they're not sure if they really belong here, and then watching them just kind of mature and really grow into themselves over the course of their 4 years here. It's just incredibly powerful, and I feel so grateful that they allow me to play that role in their lives. It's also been through my first year advisees that I've kind of seen really up close what it means to build an academically inclusive educational experience, and the kinds of steps that we need to take beyond just financial aid to make sure that the playing field is level. So so that's something that, again, I understood in an abstract sense, whether it was through my research or through kind of other roles I played at the university, but actually seeing the embodiment of it and viewing it through the eyes of my advisees, that's been really transformative. So for example, one of the steps that I took earlier this spring, and again, very much informed by my experience of being a first year advisor. And in my case, all of my advisees over the last couple of years have been first gen low income students on high financial aid. That one of the step that I took this spring to eliminate the summer work requirement, earnings requirement for our financial aid students, to enable them to be able to explore more freely in the summer, take advantage of perhaps lower paid or unpaid internships and other opportunities that would be out of reach and are out of reach if they're also worrying about meeting their summer earnings requirement. And I did that because not only had I been hearing stories in general, but I had been seeing the effect on my advisees of the pressure of having to earn over the summer to apply towards their fees in the fall. And I wanted just to free them from that, so they could have some of those transformative summer experiences that we all know can make all the difference in terms of the trajectory that you pursue after you leave Harvard.
Thank you, Claudine. An additional question, this is a fun one. Given that many of us have more time on our hands right now, could you share any reading recommendations? What are you reading right now?
Oh, wow. So I'm finally reading The Sympathizers. So I'm like a few years late on that, but it had been on my list for a really long time. So that's been terrific. And I basically, I devour novels. And at this point, I'm trying to think of, I've read at least 3 in the last 10 weeks because that's the way I decompress. And I'm blanking now on exactly which ones I've read, but I'm happy to, once I remember, I'm happy to email them to Philip Lovejoy and he can send them out to everyone with my recommended reading list. But so I've been doing a lot of that. And then the other thing is, we have a new tradition in our family because we're home together all the time. We get to alternate who gets to choose the evening's activity. And so my 13-year-old son is, obsessed with the Fast and Furious movie franchise. So I've now seen every Fast and Furious movie. So that's the other big accomplishment of the last 10 weeks.
Excellent. Last question, Dean Gay. Beyond financial support, what can alumni do to support Harvard and its students?
Oh, yeah. So I think the most important thing that you can do all the time, which is tell your story so that people truly understand what Harvard's about in all of its richness and diversity and complexity. Unless you're out there telling your story, I think the myths of Harvard tend to dominate the conversation about Harvard. So that's the first thing I'd say. And then kind of more specifically to this moment, my heart goes out to the class of 2020 who are graduating into such an uncertain future. And so, my appeal to you is create opportunities for them. If there are internships, if there are jobs, that just could make such a big difference. I think for some, their plans for the next year have completely come undone. And yes, disruptions are to be expected, and they are global. But I think what I know I don't want, is for them to be on a permanently changed trajectory. And if there's a way that the Harvard community could mobilize and come together to prevent that from happening, that's what I'd love to see us do.
Thank you very much, Claudine. We're delighted that you were able to spend some time with us. We're grateful for your insights, and we are grateful for your inspired leadership of the FAS. So thank you for all you're doing for Harvard. And to our reuniting alumni, I just want to again say congratulations and look forward to having opportunities to connect with you. Thank you for all you do to stay connected, to support Harvard, its faculty, and its students. And we look forward to getting together when circumstances permit, hopefully not so very long into the future. Again, congratulations. Thank you for being with us. And that brings to our program to a conclusion. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.